So I am Madalyn, and I am here to talk to you about forging a path in a web application that was built without accessibility in mind. As a novice who knew sort of the basics of accessibility, but had only really seen it implemented in simple applications or from the ground up, and I basically didn't really know what I was doing here, but I thought that my journey might help some of you, because I feel like this is the story that a lot of developers have, where they're thrown into an application that exists already, that is pretty complex, and was built without this layer in mind, without inclusion for everyone in mind. I work at Olark. We make a chat widget that sits on your site so that you can talk to those who visit your site. And this is a really amazing thing that allows your site to be more usable for someone who is having issues with your technology or who can't find that help article. And I think it was really important to make chat usable for absolutely everyone, especially those who might be able to benefit from chat the most. So, why accessibility? Why is this something that we talk about? Why am I talking about it? Why should you care? Why is this important? There are lots of reasons that people talk about. I'm not really going to talk about any of them, because I think that this is way less important than the fact that everyone should be able to use the web. The web is this magical place where you can accomplish things that you wouldn't be able to otherwise, where you can connect with people that you wouldn't know otherwise, where you have access to information that you didn't even know was out there. And the fact that some large portion, tens of millions of people in the US alone, based on surveys and statistics, so I guess I didn't mention one of them, are unable to use the web effectively. So I'm going to revisit this question again later, but I'm going to talk about, that was the why that I just talked about. Let's talk about the what of this problem. What is web accessibility about? And when I started my project, I thought this was about following that map, about looking at that path that was already forged before me and making it a little bit wider, making sure that the brush was out of the way and that someone could reasonably follow after me. So this meant meeting a lot of standards. It meant being compliant with these rules that someone else had made up. And I thought that this was a major blocker on me shipping. I thought, okay, I have to meet absolutely everything. I have to make sure that this works with every technology, every screen reader, every operating system, every browser. I have to make sure that every single element on my page is reachable by the keyboard. And so that boils down to rules. I'm a rule follower. It's just how I'm wired. And so when I see this list of things, I'm like, okay, well, I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, and that's how I accomplish this thing, is by following these rules. Easy peasy. One quick thing. I am going to be talking about screen reader usage mostly. There are plenty of other ways to make your application accessible, but this is the main thing that I attacked in this application, given my limited resources. So I had these expectations in the back of my mind. I had these rules that I was going to follow. Here's a picture of me on an actual backpacking trip. And now I have to decide what goes with me on that trip. What tools do I have with me already, just with me? What do I pack in my bag to help me forge that path and then maybe build a bridge so that everyone can see the wonderful views and everyone can hit the amazing checkpoints throughout this forest that is an inaccessible app. And I wasn't really sure what should go in that pack from the beginning, because how do you approach this real-world abstract problem in this inaccessible application started in 2007 or 2009 that I mean, you know what legacy code is like. It's been through many different versions, and it's been built upon and built upon and built upon, and there are many layers involved. And then there's this additional layer with our chat box where it sits on sites that we have no control over. And so to make sure that it works with other people's stacks, and it makes sure that it works, again, with different browsers and different technologies, was something that I had in the back of my mind, and I wasn't really sure where to start. I did have this part figured out, but I think it's important to talk about scoping. I knew that I was going to be working on our chat box, but I think it's important to ask these questions. What is small enough for me to cover with the time and resources I have? What could benefit the most from updates? And what has the furthest reach? And in my case, that was the chat box. It was fairly well contained. The UI had been updated recently to use React and Redux, and React lends itself very well to accessibility. It could definitely stand to benefit the most because it was the oldest application, and it does have the furthest reach. If I had started with our help center or our marketing pages or a different front-end part of our site, like our billing app or configuration, that would reach our customers. And that's a sizable amount, but it wouldn't reach their customers. So that's an exponential reach there. Our chat box is on so many sites, and it would help so many more people than just editing our site. So then I took stock of my resources. I laid things on the table, and I said, okay, what do I have to work with here? I had me. I had 1 month. I had this amazing opportunity where I changed teams mid-product cycle, which meant that I had a month before the next one to do something I was really passionate about, and that was accessibility. I had browser audit tools. Most modern browsers have these audits that you can do, similar to the one that Brittany talked about just before this, and one of them is accessibility. So you can run an audit, and it'll tell you all of the more obvious holes that are in your website, things that you need to fix, like this image doesn't have an alt tag, or I'm not sure what this div does, things like that. I could talk to consultants. There are many places that can do this audit for you and give you advice and are have a lot more expertise than I do. But given the first two bullets here, me, 1 month, I skipped this part. I did consult the Web Alli community, and they are wonderful and welcoming and lovely, and they helped me with a couple problems that I wasn't quite sure how to approach on my own. And then I found out that I could automate some of this through node modules. And from the title of my presentation, I'm sure you know that I'm going to talk a lot about aXe core. And then React Alli is another wonderful one. I include both on load for each of our applications, and then it will pop all of those audit results right into the console as warnings. So it's really obvious when something is inaccessible on whatever component, whatever part of your app you're working on in whatever state it's in at that point. So this is everything I decided to bring with me. So again, I'm going to talk about aXe for a second. I was pretty biased in choosing this particular technology, partly because it is created by DQ Systems, which happens to be based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I live. And they, in addition to having an awesome open source tool that you can use to automate some accessibility things, do consulting, and also do education. About halfway through working on this project, I attended a free webinar that they had called How Persons with Disabilities Use the Web. And it featured a panel of people with varying experiences who talked about their reliance on screen readers. And when you think about screen readers, or at least when I did in the beginning, I knew immediately that those with blindness would be using the screen reader. But it didn't occur to me that those with lower vision, or those with short-term memory loss, or those who have traumatic brain injuries, those who are having difficulty concentrating, like those with autism, all rely on the screen reader. Also, a lot of people suffer from chronic pain and have mobility issues, and using a mouse with that fine motor control is really difficult for them. And so navigating by keyboard is really, really important. And realizing all of these different use cases really opened my eyes to all of these different people that I could reach and how much more robust I could make our application. So the other reason that I'm biased here is because Marcy Sutton, look this woman up, she is the queen of accessibility, works on aXe Core. And she gave the first accessibility talk that I ever saw at JSConf US 2014, and she absolutely blew my mind. And it was something that I was sort of already interested in, but this clinched it, that I needed to be working on this. So my game plan here was to get aXe Core working with my testing stack, run those audit tools on all of my components, make sure it was included in my front-end components, address those results, do some manual testing, and then address those. So why did I start with testing? It's because, well, there are many reasons, but let's go through a few. It provided a structured way for me to start chipping away at the problem in front of me. Again, I am a rule follower. So if I have a set protocol here, I know what I'm doing. And so automating this step, instead of me going through the browser and looking what was in the console and running through absolutely every state of my app, was going to take a lot of time. And doing this is way faster. So having this tool with which to blaze my path was amazing. The other great thing is that it's really repeatable. So I could put this in one component and then copy my test into all the rest of the components and quickly see which ones failed and fix those problems really quickly. Then it even goes another level, because my team could look at the stuff that I had just done and port it to their projects, and now all of their projects were tested. Furthermore, if I updated any one of those components and it broke my tests, I would know that there was an accessibility issue, even if I hadn't run it in a real browser and technically my code looked good. So these were all reasons that I wanted to start with tests. So let's talk about what that actually involved. The main function that aXe Core has for running an audit is called axe.run. It takes context, which is a section of the DOM we are testing. So you pass it either the document that's on the DOM or a specific node. And then you give it options like, it's okay if we don't look at color contrast right now, or let's ignore plain divs, or let's look at these specific selectors. Let's pare down which ones we care about right now. And then you pass in a callback to be called after the audit actually runs. And that returns these results, which are arrays of what passed and what didn't. So there's an array of violations, an array of what passed, and I mostly looked at that array of violations. So this code is based on a gist that I found of Marcy Sutton's. I will be tweeting out resources at the end of this, where we automate those tests and make a component that we can just include in our test files, and then use it to run those tests. And I tried to make this as stack agnostic as possible so that it's not relying on any one framework, but note that it is in CoffeeScript because I am one of the few people that really likes CoffeeScript. So in this first one, note that I am creating a brand new context of the DOM, and this is used using a component that I wrote that consists of very few functions that I will also be tweeting out. It's in a gist that uses JSDOM. And so I create a new DOM, I get the document of that DOM, I create a div and attach it, and then I mount my component to that div. And then I return the wrapper, the div, and the DOM. And I need the div and the DOM so that later I can clean up after myself. Because when you're tweaking the DOM and you're mounting things and then you're changing states, it's important to make sure that all of your tests don't get those side effects. So afterwards, I remove that div from the DOM and I blow it away entirely. And here's the larger function, which is more complicated than it looks. I mean, it looks more complicated than it is. And I actually run the audit. I take my node, which in my case is usually just a raw component, a React component, and then I return a promise. And I run my axe core.run with that node and the config, and if during that audit something goes wrong, I reject that promise, and otherwise I try and assert things. And I want to make sure that there are no violations. So I assert that there are no violations, has violations is false, and that the length of the violation list is 0. And if that's the case, I resolve my promise. My test should pass. Otherwise, I reject it. So my testing flow is pretty simple. I require this module that I've created, my Alli helper at the top of the document, which is not in my code here, but that's what I did. And then I say it shouldn't have accessibility errors. I've created a pretty simple component here, which is just renders an image, and it takes a URL and alt text as parameters, and then puts those into the image tag. And if I render the image component and I don't put anything in the alt text, it will fail my Alli test, which is awesome, which is why I started with the image component, because it's really easy to fail a test without that alt text. But yeah, that is the nitty-gritty of my testing. And this was awesome, because it caught a lot of my problems. It worked really well. This alerted me to the fact that all of the SVGs in my project weren't properly described, and so a screen reader had no idea what they were. It alerted me to the fact that a lot of my inputs were improperly abled and didn't have on-change events. What else did this find? This found links that we were using as buttons or things that had the wrong roles. All sorts of things that I could have cleared on my own, but it would have taken me way more time. And the fact that this was repeatable and automated and quick was really powerful. So with that path cleared, I could see the bigger issues in my application. I could figure out what I needed to move physically, manually. So I'm just going to go through the UI of our chat box and point out what a user should be able to do and then what they were able to do using a screen reader and the keyboard. So here we have a collapsed version of our chat box. Above it is our attention grabber, which just bounces and draws your eye from wherever it is on the page down to the bottom right where the chat box usually lives. It's just a visual element. And then there's the actual chat button that has some call to action text and an SVG representing whether someone is available, a chat box, or an envelope if it's going to be asynchronous communication. And it will be an email instead of a chat that the user can expect. And they could get to that, they could read that call to action text. They could see contact Madalyn. That gets a rainbow. I can see a pretty view. But they couldn't really see the image for the attention grabber. That SVG was broken. And knowing that the chat box is there at all was really hard for a screen reader user. Because if you're using a screen reader in the keyboard, you're starting at the top left of a page, and you are experiencing the web linearly, which means that you are going through a page from left to right, from top to bottom, and where's the last place you get? Bottom right. So it's unlikely that that person even knows that chat is available and there. And so I have trees to the left, and I was asked, why are trees bad? It's because they're blocking my view from the beautiful rainbow. So I had to find an effective emoji that went with my wilderness theme. So here is a conversation in action. User can see that there is a button to end the chat. There is a button to collapse the chat. And then there is a text area where they can enter the chat and press enter to send it. 3 rainbows. But that SVG up top is broken. They, again, can't see the attached file SVG or the send chat SVG. The actual chat, they can't see at all unless they do a lot of heavy lifting. And as chats come in, it's just radio silence from the screen reader. And then I have another red box here because if the chat box opens, which you can do with JavaScript, or you can do if the chat is initiated from the other end, not the visitor's end, it will pull your cursor from wherever it is on the page and put it right here. And how terrible is that if you are like using a screen reader and reading some part of the page and then all of a sudden you're not where you expect it to be? That's a horrible experience. So 5 trees. And you know what? Because this is the main reason that the application exists, chat, I'm adding more trees because it's making it harder. So here's an offline, no, this is after the chat has ended. And you can still see the conversation. There are a couple buttons you can press here, and then there's a message saying the chat has ended. You can press that button that says send transcript. You can press the button that says write chat, and you can press the button that says start conversation from the keyboard using screen reader. 3 rainbows. However, again, you can't see those SVGs. And you can't really see the previous messages, and you don't see the chat has ended message. And then even worse, but I didn't include this on the slide, if you click on send transcript or write chat, it pops up a module, which is just like on the DOM, this is still on the DOM, and it lays it over whatever was there before. So it is possible that your cursor is trapped here. And if you continue to tab, it will continue to go in these elements, and you won't actually get to fill out the send transcript form or do the rate chat survey because you can't get there. And that's terrible. So more trees than rainbows once again. So here is our offline chat box. Not here, but I'd still love to hear from you. You can see that away message. There's a form where you can enter your name and your email and an actual note, and then send it. That's all great. However, you can't see which ones are required, and if any errors come up, like if you type in an invalid email address, for example, that error message is not communicated via screen reader at all. Again, just silence. You'll have no idea what's wrong. And if you press send, you won't really know that anything happened. So a lot of events aren't really making it. So I noticed I distilled all of this information down into a few categories. There were some extra elements. A lot of stuff was on the page that you couldn't necessarily see. I had some navigation issues. I had those hidden elements where things were overlapped. And then there were live areas, the chat itself, that were totally inaccessible to a screen reader. So at this point, I had assessed the path before me. I had moved away quite a bit, and it was time to build something new. And pruning is not something you think of as building, but I think everyone can agree that some of the best pull requests are those that have a lot of removals. So I looked at this and I said, what can go? And this is something that I talked to the Web Ally community about. I was like, okay, I have this visual element that sits above our chat box that's called the attention grabber that's supposed to bring your eye from wherever it is on the page down to the bottom right. But if someone has worked hard enough to tab through all the way through linearly to the bottom right of the page and they get there, that's one more hurdle before they get to the actual chat. It's just another barrier. And they're like, yeah, hide that. We don't need that. So sometimes, in order to create a good experience, you do have to exclude some things. So that is aria hidden. Then I blazed some new trails. Like I said, it's unlikely when you get on a page that you're going to know something is sitting in the bottom right that might help you. So one of the first things that I did was to create a link to the chat box. And that link allows us, or an ID on the chat box, which allows us to link from the top right to the top left to the bottom right, which is super helpful. Then there was adjusting focus and just making sure that all of these overlaid UIs respected what was on top, both in tab index and aria hidden, so that someone's cursor moved to where it needed to be depending on what was on top of the chat box. And here's where it gets really powerful, turn-by-turn directions. This is the material that I used for my bridge. There we go. Our announcer. And on the left, you'll see a really simple div. It's a div with a paragraph in it that has some text. But the power is in the attributes on that div tag. Arialive is basically saying, how annoying should this div be? And I have it set to assertive, which is the most annoying. You can tell it to be polite or to be off. Aria atomic means, hey, let the user know when something in this div changes. And then the role of alert means, anytime something happens, shout it out. And often with a chat box, that role would be log, because a chat is a log of things. But this is a list of events that happen in the chat box. It's not the chat itself. So this gets a role of alert. And then this was hidden from the UI via CSS's awesome clip functionality. And my excuse for making this extra annoying and an alert was because I manually controlled when we actually make those changes in state. So I said, if the chat box is focus, add that event text to our list of announcements. Then join that list of announcements with periods, and then dump that list into the announcer, and then the announcer will read it out. And if otherwise, just add it to the list of announcements, and when it's focused, it'll get dumped in. And so you can see a chat box here. The user says hello there. The announcer reads out, you sent hello there. Let's say they deviate away, and they come back, and messages have happened. It'll say, Madalyn is typing. Madalyn sent, hi, how can I help you? Madalyn sent, sorry, I'm back. And if there were errors, it would say, or if the chat ended, it would say, like, chat has ended. It would read out all of these events. And this is really powerful. This is wonderful. Live regions are magic. So, again, what is web accessibility about? What is the what? Before I thought it was rules. It's about usability. It is about making sure that your actions are repeatable, that the accessible thing is the easy thing, that patterns are established, that someone doesn't lose energy going through your site, because it takes a lot of energy to remember what the screen reader has said and to work your way through a website. It's about starting somewhere. I did not accomplish absolutely everything. Our chat box is not quote unquote 100% compliant. But it's part of the way there. I chipped away, and now whoever follows me is able to make more strides. Those steps add up. And that means that we can iterate on this. So if there's a small thing that you can do in your project, go for it. It's okay that you don't have to do everything 100%. So thank you for listening to me. I can't get through a presentation without showing my rabbits. They are fantastic and adorable. My slides are here. I will be putting more resources into them because I think my resource list is incomplete at this point. Thank you so much. I hope I've sparked some inspiration in you to work on accessibility because it's so important.